$40,000 a month. Just be him. Facing that kind of money, I folded. What else could I do? The offer was just too damn good. So, for 40 grand a month, tax-free, I transformed myself into the ultimate professional stand-in, my emotional labor meter cranked to the max, my performance skills honed to a razor's edge. I turned a script worthy of a trashy soap opera into a high-paying career. 3 years later, the contract was up. The man I was paid to be, the idealized memory she clung to, was back in the country. I was ready to walk away with my $5 million severance package, but then the guy himself offered me an extra $1 million to just get the hell out of his way. Seriously? Who was he trying to insult? For $1 million, I'd roll, skip, or fly away. And when the CEO, my former employer, came chasing after me, riddled with regret, I simply pulled out my phone and called her long-lost love. Your fiancé is trying to poach me for an extra 100 grand a year. You're going to have to up your offer. There's no such thing as rekindled love in this world. There's only a working stiff protecting his paycheck with unwavering professional integrity. I stared at the face in the bathroom mirror, my fingers tracing the nearly invisible scar on my chin. Isabella Vance had given me that one last week. She'd been drunk, her fingers brushing against my cheek as she leaned in, her eyes hazy. Julian, she'd murmured, her voice thick, you never had a scar here before. I'd smiled, gently taking her wrist. You're remembering it wrong. She stared at me for a few seconds, then shoved me away and stumbled toward the bedroom. No, she slurred, you're not him. I stood my ground, steadying her as she passed. Of course I wasn't him. My name is Leo, and 3 years ago, I somehow stumbled into a life straight out of a novel, something you'd call the CEO's billion-dollar stand-in. I became the paid replacement for Isabella Vance's one true love, Julian Croft. The plot was painfully cliché. Julian had to go abroad for family reasons, and Isabella, the brilliant, lonely CEO of Vance Industries, was so lost without him that she hired a look-alike to fill the void. 3 years later, Julian returns. The stand-in is supposed to disappear gracefully, but, surprise, the CEO realizes she's fallen for the replacement. Cue the dramatic, full-on cinematic chase to win him back. And I was that unlucky stand-in. Except, I didn't feel unlucky at all. I felt like I'd won the freaking lottery. Because Isabella Vance paid. A lot. $40,000 a month after taxes. For that kind of money, I would have called her mom. Playing a substitute boyfriend? That was child's play. Mr. Ashworth, Miss Vance's car is here, the housekeeper said softly from outside the door. Got it. I snapped back to the present, adjusting my tie. Every detail had to be perfect. The deep blue, subtly patterned suit, the silver cufflinks, the Patek Philippe on my right wrist that was worth more than a house. All of it was curated to match Julian Croft's impeccable taste. Not a single thread out of place. God, I was good. The attention to detail, the flawless execution. I was a work of art. I walked out of the sprawling suburban mansion. A black Maybach was idling by the curb. The driver respectfully opened the rear door. I gave a slight nod and slid into the leather seat. Isabella was engrossed in a document, her brow furrowed. She looked up as I settled in, the cold mask of her face softening almost imperceptibly. Morning, morning, Isabella, I replied with an easy smile, retrieving her favorite iced Americano from the built-in cooler. 2 sugars. Figured you'd need it for the board meeting today. She paused, her fingers brushing against the back of my hand as she took the coffee. How did you know about the board meeting? You mentioned it on a call last Friday, I said, my tone casual. I pulled a folder from my briefcase. Here's that market analysis you wanted. I added some updated Q3 data. She took the folder, her eyes flickering as she scanned the first few pages. I knew what she was thinking. These were the things Julian used to do, and I was just a guy on the payroll. For the last 3 years, I trained myself to be a better Julian than Julian himself. I knew her favorite coffee, knew she got anxious before big meetings, knew she'd instinctively reach for someone's hand in the middle of a nightmare. For 40 grand a month, you don't just phone it in. The car descended into the underground parking garage of the Vance Industries tower. Isabella closed the folder. There's a charity gala tonight, she said suddenly. You're coming with me. Of course. I nodded, then added after a beat. Anything specific I need to prepare for? She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. No, just be like you always are. I smiled. Understood, like I always am. At the gala, I'd have to speak with Julian's cadence, socialize with Julian's effortless charm, and if necessary, kiss her the way Julian would. I had no psychological hang-ups about any of it. In fact, it was almost funny. What could I say? This ridiculous novel life was fantastic. Luckily, I was a professional. I knew how to maintain boundaries. Kiss her, please. Prime play baluran. Call her mom, sure. Kiss her? Not a chance in hell. The gala was at one of the city's most opulent hotels. The moment Isabella took my arm and we walked into the ballroom, every eye turned to us. Isabella, my dear. And who is this? A portly board member asked, giving me an appraising look. This is Leo Ashworth, my. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. I stepped in smoothly, extending my hand. A friend of Isabella's. It's a pleasure to meet you. A friend. That was our official story. No one knew I was just a stand-in. Halfway through the evening, Isabella was cornered by a group of business partners. I made myself scarce, retreating to a quiet corner with a glass of champagne. That's when I felt it, a sharp, probing gaze. I turned. Standing not far from me, a wry smile playing on his lips, was a man who looked like a more mature, more polished version of the face I saw in the mirror every morning. He shared my features, but carried himself with an effortless grace I could only ever imitate. My heart gave a sudden, hard thud. Julian Croft, my hand, holding the champagne flute, barely flinched. I kept the perfect practice smile plastered on my face. Julian started walking toward me, each step a study in calculated elegance. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, his tie a muted, dark pattern, almost identical to my own outfit. Or rather, my outfit was identical to his. I was the copy, after all. Excuse me, he said, stopping in front of me, his lips curled in a confident smirk. Leo Ashworth. I raised my glass in a mock toast, my voice even. Mr. Croft, I've heard so much about you. He chuckled, his eyes sweeping from the Patek on my wrist to my face. Isabella's taste hasn't changed, I see. I didn't reply, just took a sip of my champagne. Julian swirled the wine in his glass, then leaned in, lowering his voice. Do you know why I came back early? I don't. And I don't care, I said with a pleasant smile. I'm just here to do a job. His eyes narrowed, clearly surprised by my directness. You're a professional, he stated. But this game is over. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, $1 million, he said, his gaze locking with mine, to sign the NDA and disappear. Completely. I almost laughed out loud. This wasn't in the original script. A $5 million severance package, plus a $1 million bonus from him to vanish. This was the deal of a lifetime. But on the outside, I remained a cool pillar of indifference. Mr. Croft, my contract with Ms. Vance is legally binding. The penalty for breach is 10 times the annual fee. I know, he said with a smirk. So tell me, what's your price? I shrugged. I just follow the contract. He understood immediately. Fine. 1 million. To disappear right now. I looked at him for 2 seconds, then broke into a grin. Deal. Our glasses clinked together, the sound crisp and final. He knew exactly what I wanted. When Isabella returned, Julian was gone. Who were you talking to? She asked, her gaze drifting to where he had stood. An investor. We were just discussing market trends. I lied without missing a beat, taking the empty glass from her hand. Tired? We can head out if you want. She shook her head, her eyes a little distant. Not yet. There are a few more clients I need to see. I nodded, not pressing the issue, but I knew the next act was about to begin. Sure enough, the next morning, Isabella's lawyer called me. Mr. Ashworth, Ms. Vance would like to terminate your contract ahead of schedule. The impeccably dressed lawyer slid a folder across the polished table. As per your agreement, here is a check for $5 million. I signed the papers without a second thought, so quickly that the lawyer blinked in surprise. Mr. Ashworth, you seem quite amenable to this. Just business, I said, pocketing the check with a smile. Please thank Ms. Vance for her generosity these past 3 years. Walking out of the Vance Industries tower, I squinted against the bright sunlight. My phone buzzed. A notification from my bank. A deposit of $1 million from a private account belonging to Julian Croft. I let out a low whistle and hailed a cab. The airport, please. 3 days later, Miami Beach. I was stretched out on a lounge chair under a massive umbrella on a private beach, sunglasses on, lazily sipping an iced coconut water. The phone beside me lit up with a message from Julian. She's looking for you. I scoffed and turned the phone off completely. The money was in the bank. Who cared about the plot anymore? I rolled over, ready for a nap, when a shadow fell over me. Leo. The familiar voice sent a jolt through my entire body. I slowly took off my sunglasses. Isabella Vance stood over me. Her face was pale, with dark circles under her eyes. She clearly hadn't slept in days. I've been looking for you for 3 days, she said, her voice hoarse. Why didn't you answer your phone? Wait, how did she find me? I thought for a second, and then it hit me. Holy crap. She doxed me. Of course she did. I sat up, sighing. Isabella, our contract is over. I don't want the contract, she said, her voice rising, drawing glances from a few nearby sunbathers. I want you, the plot. Right on cue. How amusing. I rub my temples. Isabella, you need to calm down. I am calm, she said, staring at me with a terrifying intensity. I've had 3 days to think, and I've realized something. I don't love Julian. I love you. The habits, the little details. That was all you, Leo. Not him. I was silent for a moment. Then I let out a short, humorless laugh. Isabella, do you know how I was able to play the part so perfectly for 3 years? She looked confused. Because I was playing a part, I said, looking her straight in the eye. Every cup of coffee at the perfect temperature, every well-timed word of concern, every single gesture. It was all calculated. I stood up, brushing the sand off my shorts. After all, 40 grand a month is a powerful motivator. Wouldn't you agree? The color drained from her face. You were paid to perform, and I paid you. Now we're even. We owe each other nothing. I turned to walk away. Leo. She grabbed my wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. How much did Julian give you? I'll double it. I stopped, sighed, and pulled out my phone to call Julian. What? Julian's voice came through, sharp and annoyed. Your girl's over here, I said, my tone lazy. You might want to come pick her up. There were a few seconds of silence, then a cold laugh. Send me the address. 20 minutes later, a ridiculous drama unfolded under the shade of a beach cabana. Isabella and Julian were locked in a heated argument while I sat off to the side, serenely sipping my coconut water like a spectator at a tennis match. You don't love him. You just got used to being taken care of. Julian snapped. God, the dialogue was terrible. And you? Isabella shot back. You disappear for 5 years and then waltz back in, sniffing around for Vance Industries capital? Is that it? Julian's face tightened. You have me investigated? I couldn't help myself. Excuse me. Sorry to interrupt, but can I go now? Mister. 1 million. Julian snarled. Please remain neutral. What 1 million? Isabella asked, her focus instantly sharpening on the key phrase. The situation was spiraling, so I stepped in. Ultimately, with my expert mediation, Isabella temporarily agreed to at least talk things out with Julian. As for me, I was on a flight to Santa Fe that night. Distance from the drama is the key to survival. The flagstone paths of Santa Fe shimmered after a light rain. I sat on the second-floor balcony of my Adobe-style inn, slowly brewing a pot of single-origin oolong tea. My phone screen lit up. Julian's 17th missed call. I sipped my tea and swiped the notification away. The payment had cleared. I didn't offer post-sale support. The inn's owner, a woman with a warm, sun-weathered face, brought over a plate of fruit. Mr. Ashworth, she said with a smile, thinking of heading up to see the Aspens today? No, I think I'll just wander around the plaza, I said, pouring her a cup. Is it always this quiet? It's the off-season. Nice and peaceful. She sat down across from me, her eyes twinkling with friendly curiosity. A young man like you, traveling all by yourself? No girlfriend. I smiled. Freedom has its price. She nodded, not quite understanding, and after a bit more small talk, went back downstairs. I gazed at the distant cloud-shrouded mountains and let out a long breath. This was the life. No contracts, no charades, no hysterical CEOs. My peace was shattered that evening. Mr. Ashworth. The owner came rushing up the stairs, looking flustered. There's a lady downstairs looking for you. She says she's your fiancé. The teacup nearly slipped from my grasp. Isabella, docs again. I shot to my feet and peered over the balcony railing. Down below, dressed in casual jeans and a sweater with her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, was Isabella Vance. She was looking right up at me. As our eyes met, a triumphant smile touched her lips. Found you. 10 minutes later, we were sitting in the inn's quiet tea room. The air was thick enough to chew. How did you find me this time? I asked bluntly. Credit card receipts under your name, she said, her tone deceptively light as her fingers traced the rim of her cup. Leo, you underestimate the resources of Vance Industries. I rubbed my temples. Isabella, we're done. No, we're just beginning. She suddenly grabbed my hand, her grip shockingly tight. I spent the last 3 days digging. Julian only came back for our new green energy division. He doesn't love me. I try to pull my hand away. What does that have to do with me? It has everything to do with you. Her nails dug into my skin. You were the one who was actually by my side for 3 years. The coffee, the reports, all of it was an act. I cut in calmly. Isabella, you paid for substitute Julian Croft, not for Leo Ashworth. Her eyes immediately welled up. Then tell me this. When I was in the hospital with that fever last year, you stayed with me for 3 days straight. Was that an act too? I paused for a fraction of a second. I remember that. She'd had a 102-degree fever, and and the doctor said it was from exhaustion and a compromised immune system. The contract required me to portray a concerned partner, but when she grabbed my hand in a delirious haze and whispered, "Don't go," I'd stayed a little longer than I had to. That, I said finally, was professional integrity. Isabella shot to her feet. The teacup overturned, dark tea spreading across the wooden table like a stain. "Fine, just fine." Her voice trembled. "In that case, I'm hiring you again. Double your old salary. 100,000 a month." I sighed and pulled out my phone, dialing Julian. "What now?" Julian's voice was pure irritation. "Your fiancé is over here in Santa Fe, offering me 100 grand a month to come back," I said lazily. "According to our previous arrangement, I believe this constitutes a counteroffer that requires a renegotiation of your payment." I heard the sound of something shattering on the other end of the line. 5 seconds later, Julian's voice came back, tight with fury. "Send me the address. I'm on my way." That night, in a suite at a luxury Santa Fe resort, Act 2 of the melodrama commenced. "Isabella, are you insane?" Julian yanked his tie loose. "Chasing a hired substitute across the country." "And you?" Isabella retorted. "Chasing me to fund your failing project?" I sat on the sofa, methodically peeling a tangerine, feeling like I was watching a particularly bad reality show. "Leo," Julian suddenly rounded on me. "You took the money. You're supposed to stick to the deal." I swallowed a slice of tangerine and held up my hands in a gesture of pure innocence. "Hey, I didn't call her." "Enough." Isabella grabbed her purse and hurled it at Julian. "How dare you try to buy him off? For the last 3 years, he was scamming you for your money." Julian roared back. "Wake up, Isabella. He's just an actor." The room fell silent. I wiped my hands, stood up, and headed for the door. "Well, you two have fun. I'm out." "Stop," they both yelled in unison. I turned back, exasperated. "What now?" Isabella took a deep breath, pulled a document from her bag, and slapped it on the table. "A new contract. 200,000 a month. To be yourself." Julian's face was a thundercloud. "Leo, don't you forget our agreement." I looked at the contract on the table, then at Julian's furious face, and I started to laugh. "You know, Isabella," I said, picking up the contract and slowly tearing it in half, "there are some things money really can't buy." "That's right. Having money lets me be this cocky." As they both stared in stunned silence, I opened the door and walked out. The next morning, I was on a flight to Anchorage, Alaska. I smiled and powered down my phone. Let's see her follow me to Alaska. I doubted even she could pull that off. Outside the airplane window, the sea of clouds was brilliant in the morning sun. Freedom, it turned out, was priceless. The wind at Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport carried the bite of distant glaciers. I zipped up my shell jacket and dragged my roller bag toward the shuttle bus. After 3 days of being off the grid, my phone exploded with notifications the moment I turned it on. 27 messages from Isabella, 13 from Julian, and a handful from unknown numbers. I marked them all as read and booked a bunk at a downtown hostel. 3,650 miles from New York. Surely, she wouldn't follow me here. The hostel was near the water, run by a grizzled guy who looked like he'd wrestled a bear or two. He took one look at me and grinned. "Let me guess, kid. Heartbreak." My hand paused as I passed him my ID. "Is it that obvious?" "Only 3 kinds of people come all the way up here to the last frontier," he said, lighting a cigarette as he checked me in. "The broke, the brokenhearted, and the bats hit crazy. You don't look crazy and you don't look broke, so that only leaves one." I just smiled and took my key card. I was in a 6-bed dorm with only 2 other occupants. I claimed a top bunk by the window. I just tossed my pack up when a head popped up from the bunk below. "New guy." It was a girl with a cascade of colorful dreadlocks and a small diamond stud in her nose that glinted in the pale Alaskan sun. "Yeah," I grunted, not really in the mood to chat. "I'm Maya. Cycled up from the lower 48, she said, undeterred. "So what's your story? What brings you to the land of the midnight sun?" I lay back and stared at the ceiling. "Came to breathe some free air." She snorted. "Cliché. But judging by the look on your face, I'm guessing you got dumped by some rich chick." I bolted upright, the cheap metal frame of the bed groaning in protest. Maya's eyes went wide. "Whoa, nailed it." "No, I dumped her." That evening, I was smoking on the rooftop deck when Maya joined me with 2 cans of a local craft beer. "Here," she said, handing me one. "Take the edge off. Don't worry, I'm not actually interested in your love life. But hey, you know there's this old Tlingit storyteller down in the Arts District? They say he can tell you things about your past you never knew." I took the beer. Not really my thing. "Hey, you're here, right?" "Might as well," she said, bumping my shoulder with hers. "I can take you tomorrow." I was about to say no when I looked up and froze. It was her. It had to be. Amid the tourists milling around the downtown square, One tall, elegant figure stood out. Even with sunglasses and a face mask, I knew that posture, that way of holding herself. Isabella. The beer can slip from my hand, clattering onto the concrete. What's wrong? Maya asked, following my gaze. Whoa, that woman's got style for days. Wait, why do you look like you've seen a ghost? I grabbed her wrist. Where's the back exit? 5 minutes later, I was crouched behind a dumpster in the hostel's back alley, frantically checking flight arrivals on my phone. Isabella had landed in Anchorage on the same day as me, just 2 hours later. So that's the rich chick, Maya said, squatting next to me and offering a cigarette. Damn, chasing you all the way to Alaska. That's some next-level stuff. I lit the cigarette, my hand shaking slightly. Is there any way to get away from her? Easy, Maya said, blowing a perfect smoke ring. Tomorrow, you come with me. We're heading for a base camp near Denali. Rich girls like that, they tend to go extinct above 10,000 feet. Just as I was about to answer, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Leo, I see you. We need to talk. I stared at the message for 3 seconds, and then I started to laugh. Maya, I said, grinding the cigarette out under my boot. Can we leave right now? She raised an eyebrow. What's the rush? I just realized something, I said, standing up and dusting off my pants. Running won't solve a thing. We met on the 3rd floor of the Crow's Nest, a restaurant with panoramic views of the water. When Isabella took off her sunglasses, I saw that her eyes were rimmed with red. You've lost weight, was the first thing she said. I poured myself a glass of water. Isabella, what's the point of all this? I'm not here to chase you, she said suddenly. I'm here to apologize. My hand trembled, and water sloshed onto the table. It took me 3 days of reviewing airport surveillance footage to figure out you flew to Santa Fe, she said, her head down as she toyed with her glass. Then I had my people check every flight out of New Mexico until we found your ticket to Anchorage. I frowned. What are you trying to say? I'm trying to say. She took a deep breath. I'm sorry for using you as a stand-in for 3 years. Outside, the cry of a gull sounded unnaturally loud. I hadn't expected to hear those words. I didn't know what to say. Julian was right. I was being selfish, she said, a bitter smile on her face. She slid a dusty canvas bag across the table. These are yours. You left them at the house. I thought you might want them back. I opened the bag. Inside were a few well-worn programming textbooks and an old, beat-up laptop, the only things I'd brought with me from my previous life, which I kept locked in a drawer for 3 years. My throat felt tight. You went through my things? I found them when I was clearing out the guest room, she said, her gaze complicated. Leo, who are you? Really? I slammed the bag shut. That was a question I couldn't answer. Just as the silence became unbearable, there was a commotion at the top of the stairs. Julian Croft appeared, breathing heavily, his bespoke suit looking comically out of place against the restaurant's rustic decor. Oh, thank you, universe. Thank you for the plot armor. A duo always becomes a trio. It's the immutable law of bad romance novels. I knew I'd find you here, he seethed, glaring at both of us. Isabella, do you have any idea what's happening? The investors for the green energy deal are waiting for you. Isabella didn't even look up. The project is canceled. What? Julian's face went white, then red. For him? For this substitute. I quietly edged my chair away, tried to avoid the impending blast radius. He is not a substitute, Isabella said calmly. He was the one by my side for 3 years. He was the one who remembered all my habits. He was the one who stayed up all night when I had a fever. Julian, what right do you have to call him a substitute? Julian looked like he'd been physically struck. I cleared my throat awkwardly. Well, you two have a lot to talk about. I should probably. Stay right there, they both shouted. The other diners were openly staring now. I sighed, pulled out my phone, and dialed a number. Hey, Maya, you think that Jeep of yours has room for one more? Half an hour later, while Isabella and Julian were still arguing over investment portfolios, I was in Maya's beat-up Wrangler, speeding toward Denali National Park. In the rearview mirror, the lights of Anchorage grew smaller and smaller. Maya let out a wolf whistle. So you just ran for it? I rolled down the window, letting the cold, clean air wash over me. What else was I supposed to do? You know what I think, she said, expertly swerving to avoid a moose. I think a guy like you deserves to be alone. Some stories just need to have the last page turned. The morning at Denali Base Camp was brutally cold. The wind howled, whipping the colorful expedition flags into a frenzy. I stood before the Climbers Memorial, watching the sunrise paint the snow-capped peaks in shades of gold. Maya, bundled in a parka, was stomping her feet beside me. Jesus, it's cold. The air up here feels like swallowing ice chips. The hot water in my thermos had already formed a thin layer of ice on top. I unscrewed the lid and handed it to her. Her lips were turning blue. You'll live. Besides, you're the one who dragged me up here. She took the thermos, then jabbed me hard in the ribs with her elbow. Look, 10 o'clock. I turned, and my breath caught in my throat. There, standing at the edge of the camp, was Isabella. She wore a bright yellow expedition suit, a lone flame flickering against the vast expanse of white. The fierce wind whipped her hair across her face. Her nose and cheeks were bright red from the cold, and tiny ice crystals clung to her eyelashes. No, fucking way, Maya breathed. Did the rich girl take a rocket ship to get here? I instinctively reached for my phone, only to remember it had lost service 3 days ago, back in the last town we'd passed through. Isabella was already walking toward us, her heavy boots crunching on the frozen ground. A private helicopter, she said as she reached me, her breath forming a white cloud in front of her face. Chartered. Leo, we need to talk. I looked at her fingers, which were turning a worrying shade of purple, then took off my own down jacket and wrapped it around her without a word. Back to the tent. Now, inside the communal mess tent, the small stove cast our flickering shadows onto the canvas walls. Isabella cradled a mug of hot tea, her fingers slowly regaining their color. Then, she reached into an inner pocket and pulled out a laptop. My laptop. I cracked the password, she said, looking me directly in the eye. Those lines of code, and the folder you labeled the old world. The hot tea sloshed over the rim of my mug, scalding my hand. Outside, I could hear the distant jingle of a supply train's bells and the sound of climbers singing an old folk song. You're from another place, aren't you? Her voice was quiet, but it hit me like a thunderclap. The stove crackled, the firelight dancing in her bloodshot eyes. I noticed for the first time that she still had a small bandage on her pinky finger from where she'd cut it on a broken coffee mug last week. Something like that, I finally admitted. Think of it as a parallel universe. To my complete surprise, a look of profound relief washed over her face. That explains it, she whispered. The way you always looked at me, like I was some kind of science experiment. You don't think that's insane? Compared to what? She ran a finger over a worn sticker on the laptop's lid. I'd rather know that. I just have one question. If there had never been a contract, it never would have happened, I said, my voice firm. We were always on 2 different tracks, Isabella. Her pupils contracted slightly. Then she let out a soft, humorless laugh. So cruel. You won't even let me have the fantasy. This is me being responsible, I said, adding another block of fuel to the stove. You weren't in love with me. You were in love with the illusion of being perfectly cared for. A sudden gust of wind shook the tent violently. A sliver of sunlight pierced a seam in the canvas, landing on her open palm. I saw the faint pink line of scar there, from last year when she'd shielded me from a piece of flying glass. I know, she said suddenly. I think I figured it out when I lost track of you outside that little town. When I realized I was just hunting you. She reached into her parka and pulled out an envelope. This is for you. A black credit card gleamed in the firelight. I raised an eyebrow. Julian's? After I froze all his assets, he came crawling back like a kicked dog, she said, a scornful smile playing on her lips. Told me everything, including the little deal he made with you. A dark look crossed her face. He won't be a problem for you anymore. We both started laughing, a raw, unburdened sound that startled the snow buntings pecking for crumbs outside the tent. Was that a threat? I decided not to ask. Leo, for the first time, she deliberately put some space between us. I came here to tell you. I'm letting you go. The fire danced in her eyes, and I realized with a jolt that the obsessive heat was gone, replaced by a clear, calm resolve. What's next for you? I asked, handing her a fresh mug of tea. Rebuilding Vance Electronics, she said, taking the mug. Her pinky finger unconsciously stuck out, a gesture she'd once painstakingly copied from Julian, now an ingrained habit of her own. And I've enrolled in an online program at MIT. I saw that her phone's wallpaper was no longer a picture of us, but a screenshot of her class schedule. The lock screen was an old, faded photo of a little girl standing proudly in front of a crumbling factory building with a sign that read Vance Electronics. That's great, I said, and I meant it. As she stood up to leave, she knocked over her hiking pole. We both bent down to pick it up, our foreheads almost touching. I caught the familiar scent of her perfume, but this time it didn't make my heart race. Take care of yourself, Leo. She suddenly pulled me into a fierce hug, the friction of our parkas making a soft, swishing sound. I watched her walk toward the waiting helicopter, her bright yellow suit a shrinking speck against the snow, until she disappeared into the brilliant white glare. Maya appeared silently in the tent beside me. So that's it? It's over. What else is there? I said, pulling the credit card from my pocket. The sun caught its surface, refracting a tiny, perfect rainbow. 3 months later. The rainy season in Cartagena. I was sitting in a cafe in the old walled city, watching raindrops trace paths down the ancient stones of a nearby cathedral. On my laptop screen was a newly arrived email. Sender, Isabella Vance. Attachments, a photo from the Vance Electronics NASDAQ listing ceremony. A close-up of her official MIT acceptance letter. A picture of a newly built computer lab and inner-city orphanage. The body of the email contained only one sentence. Finally learned to make my own coffee. I smiled and closed the laptop. On the cafe's television, a financial news channel was reporting. Vance Electronics has announced the termination of its partnership with Croft Holdings as it pivots fully into the AI development sector. My phone buzzed. It was a voice message from Maya, the sound of seagulls and ocean waves in the background. Made it to Sri Lanka, and you'll never guess who I saw at the port in Colombo. That douchebag Julian, hauling crates on a shipping freighter. I sent back a laughing emoji and opened my travel journal. Tucked inside the front cover was a bank card. The last time I checked the balance, it read, $6, $217, $842, $36. Outside, the rain had stopped. A flock of white doves soared past a glistening church steeple. A girl selling flowers walked by, a clay pot balanced on her head, humming a local folk song. I glanced one last time at the photo in the email. On the trading floor, Isabella stood tall in a sharp, elegant suit, her eyes shining like stars. Parallel lines, finally extending toward their own separate horizons. The end.